Welcome to this short class on how to use pastel pencils. We're going to be creating this magnificent blue butterfly here. You don't need very many pencils for this tutorial. So if you're ready, let's get cracking. So the first thing I'd like to take you through before we pick up a pencil is the card I'm working on. I'm working on Clairefontaine pastel matte paper, and this is the dark grey. You can see I'm just working on a piece of scrap for this tutorial, hence it's got a bit of a wonky edge to it. The next thing that I'd like to show you is the pencils. So we're using a mix. We're using the Faber-Castell. I've got a full set of the Faber-Castell. They're a really good all-round pencil. I definitely advise picking up a set of those over something like the Derwents. I've got more on that in other videos. And we're also using two of the Stabilo Carbothello pencils because they've got a really great amount of colour to them and they're nice and soft, which is actually very good for subjects like butterflies or flowers. Okay, so you might have your pencils, but they're probably new, which means that they're not sharpened in the way that I would usually encourage my students to sharpen them in. For this class, it doesn't matter too much because we're not adding lots of fine details, but let me show you how to properly sharpen a pastel pencil before we get cracking. You can always use the timestamps in the video to jump ahead and get drawing if you already know how to sharpen a pencil. So I'm right-handed, but I hold the pencil in my left hand when I'm sharpening. I then take the thumb of the hand holding the pencil. This is the bit that confuses everyone. So it's the thumb of the hand holding the pencil that's doing most of the work. Taking the blade, and please make sure that you're using the flat edge of the blade to rest your thumb against. Obviously, do not give this task to children and young people. Use that thumb to guide the blade through the pencil. Effectively, my right hand is holding the weight of the blade, but not actually doing anything. What you'll find is you've got a lot of control doing it in this way. I look to run the blade along the length of the pencil instead of digging it in. It's much more effective. Once you've got a fairly good amount of pastel out, you want to come to your sanding paper. I've got P120. Make sure that there aren't any little bits of sharpening and shavings underneath, because little bumps like that can actually break the pencil. And hold the pencil as flat to the table as you can. By holding the pencil flat to the table, I've got as much pastel in contact with the sanding paper as possible. Once you've got a point, you must make sure that you give it a good wipe off. And there you have it, a lovely sharp pencil. Now, as I said, it's not too important for this class. You don't need to actually get your pencils perfectly sharp. You probably want to release a bit of pastel like so, but you can see how you don't need a nice point because we will actually be shading a lot of this in. We don't need fine details. All right. Let's get on with the drawing. I've drawn this out just quickly by hand using one of the pastel pencils. I wouldn't usually advise you to do this, it's just that this is a little demonstration piece. Usually I'd say do your drawing on a separate piece of paper and then transfer it on. You can find details again for how to transfer a drawing linked down below for you, just because rubbing out pastel is not very easy. So if you go wrong, it's a little bit tricky to adjust that outline and not end up with smudge marks on your paper. Okay, let's crack on. And the first thing we're going to look at is how to fill in the tooth of the card properly with your pencil. One of the main things I often see when I'm teaching people with pastel pencils is I'll tell them to fully fill in the card and they'll do this. I'll go over it and I'll say, yeah, I'm going to fully fill in the card like that. Now, this isn't the best pencil to demonstrate this with, just because the blue of the pencil and the grey of the card are quite similar in tone, so it's a bit tricky to see. But what we've got is the tooth of the card is still visible. We haven't totally filled it in. So when you want to fill in the tooth of the card, what I would advise is to put several layers down. I wouldn't go in and press super hard straight away. I'd just put plenty of layers on top of each other. By working in light layers, you protect the structure of your card for longer, which is really good. The structure of the card starts off very open. Think of it like velvet carpet almost, and we are filling up the gaps between the velvet with pastel. As soon as you start to rub out too much, or as soon as you start to press too hard with your pencil, that texture of the paper crumples inwards and it won't grab hold of your pastel so well. It won't behave very well. So I would advise, as I say, to work in light layers to begin with. Now, the other thing to note as I move over this butterfly is how I'm using my pencil. As with most creatures, there is a certain direction to what I'm drawing. So if you have a look at a photo of a butterfly, you'll be able to see the structure of the wings, veins in the wings, and they are floating outwards. So that is what I am mimicking with my pencil here. I'm almost thinking of a joint down here, which is true. They have got a joint, of course, down here, and everything bursting out of that joint. Think of it like a bouquet of flowers or a fan, and it's opening out. So you watch my pencil as I'm working, and again, I'm working in those light layers on top of each other, and you can see that I'm fanning that pencil, I'm turning the pencil, and that's giving me a really nice spread. It's giving me an open feeling to the wing before we've even put any details down. You can see there's a small amount of dust there. That's really good. It means that I filled in the tooth of my card effectively. And that's what you want for a smooth subject. For other subjects which are a bit more complex, like your mammals with the fur, you don't want to be filling in the tooth of the card quite so quickly. But for these simpler subjects, which are perfect if you are a beginner, because you'll still get excellent results, then for these smooth subjects, you do want to fill in the tooth of the card. I'm just going to tap that off. Do make sure that you tap or blow off your work as you go, because pastel dust, of course, does travel and it can get stuck into the card. So again, watch how I'm using the pencil. I'm spreading out these strokes. I'm heading over it a few times until I see the tooth of the card disappear. So the tooth is just another way to say grain. So the next thing to note, and there is quite a lot to think about when you're using a pastel pencil, so practice makes perfect. I do multiple studies, is how I'm moving it. So I don't just mean I'm spreading it out, I'm lifting it, I'm arcing my pencil with every stroke. So you can hear that. You can hear that the pencil is hitting the paper repeatedly. So I'm moving the pencil before it touches the paper, and then it sweeps onto it seamlessly. And again, I'm moving the pencil as I lift it from the page. And this is preventing hard shading lines. If I was to shade in hard, and I'll just do a bit down here to show, get these marks, and then you get another row of marks and another row of marks. And what will start to happen is you'll get all these lines zigzagging together. Again, this pencil doesn't actually show up that well on the dark grey card, but you'll especially find if you're working on the sand coloured paper, which is what I would often use for a mammal, you get a lot of jagged shading marks, which can be really tricky to get rid of. So you might think, oh, what have you done? You've gone straight over where the body will go. But that's fine, because dark tones in pastel will sit on top of anything else. So we'll be using black for part of the body. That will sit on top of any other pastel that you've put down. So I don't need to worry about leaving a gap. Instead, I'd quite like to take this blue really straight into the middle to make sure that we don't end up with little bits of card showing through when we put the body in. We want to make sure those wings are well attached to our butterfly. Okay, so that's our first layer. Pop that pencil back. I'm now going to take the 151. A couple of notes on this pencil, and I do use this pencil quite a lot. It is very useful. It's very brittle. Most of the blue pencils are quite brittle, is what you will find, be to do with the pigment. But also, it is a very pungent pencil. There is a lot of colour in this. It has a very powerful tinting property. So you want to be really quite careful. If you go in too hard, if you add too much of this, look, it's very dark. It's going to be difficult to cover up with these lighter tones. It won't work too well. So I would just go a little bit steady on this stage. Again, think about your light layers. So you can see, because I'm using the paper, that the paper is wobbling. Sometimes what I do is get a drawing board and I actually tack my work to a drawing board just to stop it wobbling and lifting around. And also look how I'm moving my card. What I often see people doing when they first start is they'll forget they can move their drawing, and they're doing this and they're trying to get the right angle and they just can't. So remember, you can move your paper. Now I'm looking at my photo, just seeing where's lighter and where's darker. Again, I'm trying to be nice and light. I'm really not putting a lot of pressure through this pencil. You just don't need to. And I'm going to very carefully take this up to the edge. So I'll show you on one and then we'll just speed it up for the others because they're all the same. So I'm being very, very gentle with the pencil. I'm still trying to lift it where possible so I don't end up with too many hard shading marks, and that will reduce, of course, the amount of blending that we've got to do later. Now there is a strip of dark grey, if not black, at the top here. Again, I don't need to worry about heading over into that area because the grey and the black will sit on top of this pencil nicely. So to give this a neat edge, I'm just heading around, using the pencil like a pen at this point, so I've got a good amount of control. I've given it a hard edge. So this is the next thing for beginners to really take note of. So what I see people doing is they'll put their hard edge in and then they'll do this and just shade nice and lightly up to the edge and go, okay, that's done. but it doesn't look right. This hard edge has not joined into your drawing. So what you need to do, take your pencil, you don't want it too sharp at this point, and I'm moving it in lots of small circles, again, hardly any pressure. And what I would encourage you to think about doing is using your pencil like a blending tool or a mixer. So not a lot of pressure, but you're just thinking about evenly mixing all of this together. So I'm using small circles to try and avoid, again, too many shading marks. And also it allows me to get into all of the different shapes around the edge nice and accurately. So now that I've got the blending right up to that edge, I'm going to start to pull it out into the rest of the wing. And now I'm using linear strokes, and again, I'm being very, very light with the pencil. I'm just heading over the top of some of that work. Can you see how that has given us a really beautiful edge, but it feels like it is solid in there? Instead of, again, I'll just do it kind of incorrectly on this wing. So I'll put down my light shading. Here, note that I'm using the pencil on the side. This is a bit more of an advanced technique. It does take a bit of getting used to, but this is what I encourage a lot of my students to do for underpainting stages. You get a very even shade, and for larger areas, it's much faster to fill in as well. The best way to do that, as an aside, is to hold your pencil towards the end of your pencil, and that means you can get it nice and low to the table. Okay, so if we go and put that edge in, again, this is what I see most beginners doing, is they'll put that edge in, pressing really quite hard, and they'll do a little bit more shading, and no more. So you can really see the difference here. Obviously, we've got a lot more work to do in the rest of the wing, but you can see the difference between the edges of these wings. This one doesn't feel filled in, it feels quite empty. So you must take your pencil, and you must continually go around the inside edge until it starts to feel solid, and you can get lighter and lighter and lighter with your pressure as you work inwards. You'll get much faster as you practice these techniques, but I would really encourage you to do it instead of always reaching for a blender. Getting good pencil control will excel your drawing much faster, and you'll also start to learn much more fully about tone and tonal transitions. And then when you get to using one colour into a next, again, you'll start to learn much more easily how colour theory is going to affect your work. If you just get a blender out every time and smudge from one to the other, you're not really learning a lot. So I would really encourage you to just practice these skills. So we'll just fast forward through the other two wings. Okay, so we've got all of the dark blue in around the wings. I'm now just going to finish off blocking in our butterfly by taking this 181, which is your cool dark grey, your Payne's grey, and putting in the nice borders that we have. Now you can see that tonally, tone means light and dark, this grey sits very well with the 151, the dark blue that we've just been using. So it makes them much, much easier to blend together. Now what you must make sure as you're coming in to do this bit is that you keep these edges very sharp for now. We can adjust the edges later, but for now we don't want to be dirtying that light blue inside the wing, because if you look at a photo of these butterflies, you can see that this black grey border is very neat, it's very well distinguished. So you want to sharpen up your pencil a little bit for this stage. Again, even though these areas need to be well filled in, I do try and lift my pencil as I work. It just avoids very thick, stodgy lines to be made. And it also gives you much more freedom, if you like, with your mark making. If I commit to making one line with this pencil, you'll find that you get slower and slower, and that your mark making can actually become quite inaccurate as well, as you almost refuse to take your pencil off the page, even if the pencil's going in the wrong direction. So I'd really encourage you to try and, again, practice that. Practice lifting your pencil as you're working. It'll help all areas of your drawing, not just pastel pencil. Again, for this top edge, I can just sweep the 181, this dark grey, into that dark blue, and they blend together for me very nicely. Just bring a bit of this dark grey around the edge of that wing. Might bring a bit of black into here later as well. Now again, as I said earlier, I wouldn't usually sketch out my subject in the way that I had done. And one of the issues with doing that is that you can see you end up with these little parts of the outline still visible. If I was just doing this for myself, I certainly wouldn't have outlined it in the light grey, but obviously I needed it to show up on camera for all of you. But the light grey, of course, next to the dark grey card is quite tricky to get rid of. So try and pick something that tonally is similar to your board, but shows up just enough because the colour's a bit different. That's usually what I would do. Try and pick a colour that's going to be used throughout your drawing, and it won't matter if it shows through here and there. Okay, so it's still very basic, but we have blocked in most of the butterfly. We'll be putting the body in last. So from here, we're going to move on to our next technique, which is blending two colours together. So I'm going to pick up the original blue, the 140, and again, I'm not going to press very hard. Thinking about using this like a blending tool, I'm making long stretched oval shapes with my pencil to start moving the two colours together. Now, I quite like to use a flat, blunt pencil for this. The flatter the edge, the softer the mark you'll be able to make. If I was working over a large area, I might well use my pencil on the side as I was doing earlier. So I can really push this light blue over the edges of the dark blue, because again, if you look at a photo of one of these butterflies, I very much exaggerated some of the effects that we have on the edge of the wing, but because that dark blue is such a great colour and it contrasts the lighter colours inside the wing, it makes our drawing a bit more dramatic. And that is, of course, the beauty of making a drawing and not a photograph. You've got a bit of artistic licence. So I've been very, very, very light as I've done that, and I've ended up with a nice even blend. So you don't want a lot of pressure. And what you might find if you're doing this, for example, or you're going backwards and forwards, is you get a couple of dirty marks appearing. So I'd encourage you just to keep your pencil on the page, using it in these long stretched oval shapes. If you do start to get dirty marks further up into your wing, just clean the pencil on a bit of kitchen towel and then move it over the top of those marks until they disappear. So getting lighter and lighter as I move further and further into that bit of dark blue. Okay, so the last wing, again I'm being nice and light, just moving it in those long oval shapes. So this is something you can definitely practice. I would encourage you to make 2 blocks of colour on some scrap paper and then move the 2 blocks together using the 2 different pencils, blending them, blending the space between them until you get a smooth transition. Really try and challenge yourself with that. Take 2 colours that are opposites on the colour wheel, like red and green, and see how evenly you can get them to join and meet in the middle. And that will really test your pencil control. Okay, so butterfly starts to come together quite quickly, and they are great subjects to do from that point of view. So I'm going to take that lighter blue now, the Stabilo Carbothello, the 440. This is a cooler blue than the one that we've just been using, and it's more heavily saturated. There's not as much white mixed into this. So I want you to again think about the direction of the wings. That's really important for this stage. It's going to give us a bit of movement and a bit of flow to the wings. If you were to do them, for example, going the wrong way, going going vertical, then the wing isn't going to feel correct. We won't have that feeling of the wing opening up. This applies to all different subjects. So if we were doing fur, for example, you'd need to follow the fur direction. Sometimes it can be worth sitting down for 5 or 10 minutes, studying your reference photo until you're sure where you need to go with it. So again, I wouldn't sharpen the pencil for this stage. A nice smooth edge is really great. And I'm just going to sweep the pencil on and off the page. Now what I'm doing is making a mark and then being very light and just blending it out by being lighter and lighter with the pencil around the edges of the original stroke, and we get this kind of glow effect instead of a hard line. We're not looking for hard lines, and that's something I will often see in beginner work. So really, really light, and I'm moving the pencil before it hits the page and moving it while it leaves the page, and that is what's forging me these very, very soft edges. So if I were to just demonstrate quickly what I would normally see, what I end up seeing are things like this, as well as this. I see a lot of that. So just blend those in as much as I can. And just sweep the pencil, thinking about the direction that we need to go in. I don't try and make each wing perfect in terms of make them match. I actually find if you do that, they can feel a bit wooden and contrived. So I would aim for a little bit of natural variation. So for the bottom here, I can see on my photo that there's a lot of light right up at the top of these wings and less so at the bottom. So I'm just pressing a bit harder up at the top and then letting the blue trail out. You can see now that this cooler blue has gone on. It almost makes the 140 beneath feel a little bit purple. So that's a really interesting aside about colour. Colour is all relative. That blue underneath looked very blue until we put this one on top, and then we suddenly look at it and say, actually, that's a little bit more violet. So now that we put something brighter on, we can start to adjust our tones a little bit more. I'm going to be very careful and take the 151, which is that very dark blue, and use it very, very lightly to begin to add a little bit of shadow between our wings. Now, I would usually encourage students to work in this way, to hold back on some of the more dramatic tones or the smaller adjustments that need to go in until the bigger areas and ranges of each tone, the lightest light and the darkest dark, or near enough, have gone in, because then it's much easier to see where can be taken lighter and where can be taken darker. If you don't work across your entire drawing all at once, or at the very least work in an area and then catch another area up after, what you'll find is you start to become a little bit blind and you quite literally don't see the bigger picture. And you can create an area that appears to be really good in isolation, and then you realise that actually you've made it too dark or too light, and you've not left enough of the different tones available for other areas of the drawing, and the whole thing feels a bit flat. So again, I'm just being very light with the pencil while I'm chatting away, and I'm going along this edge here, the edge of that dark grey, just to melt it in a little bit. So I'm really flicking my pencil around here. I'm thinking about the fact that later on we're going to put in that dark body. And if the dark body sat right next to these lighter blues, it wouldn't sit together very well. So again, I'm looking at my photo and I'm just using it to pick out those areas where the edges are a bit softer. So the bottoms of these wings, again, very, very light with the pencil, moving it before it hits the page and then continuing to move it as it leaves the page. So you can see I'm going back over some of those areas that we blended together earlier. I always work in this way, backwards and forwards between tones until they sit correctly. I never aim to get something right first time. You never will, and then it means that you're a bit worried to go back in and tamper with work that you've already spent a long time doing. So again, top tip, work across the whole of your drawing. See how I'm continually moving around. Okay, so some of these marks that I've put in with the dark blue are a little bit harsh, just a little bit. So again, take the 140 and hardly touching it to the page now. I'm just going to glaze over the top really, really lightly and just soften them in a little bit. Now, this is quite a small drawing, so it's fairly easy to work around the edges of it and not trail my hand into the work, therefore smudging it. But if you were struggling to do that, then this is where you would be using your crystal paper to rest your hand. So before we carry on, I'm just going to take the putty rubber and clean up around the edges. I really encourage you to do this as you work on any piece of art. You just need to stop occasionally and have a little bit of a clean up. What you'll find is the pastel mat can grab hold of the excess pastel, and it can become quite difficult to rub it out if you've been leaning your hand on top of it repeatedly, because you'll have been pushing it into the paper. So we just want to avoid that. Of course, this is a complete demo piece and I've got scribbles in the corner. The paper's all wonky, so I don't need to worry too much really. But for the purpose of good practice, this is what you should be doing. You should be going around and cleaning up, sharpening up any edges. Okay, so almost on to our finishing touches now. So the Carbothello Turquoise 545, which you could use a Creta colour dark turquoise for, they're almost the same pencil. This is going to provide a bit more of an iridescent bounce to our work. So far we've got different types of blue, but this is turquoise, which means it's blue heading towards green. This is really more of a green, I would say. And what that's going to do is just create an effect of iridescence. Now I've got an entire class, many classes actually, on iridescence if you want to find out more about it. But in short, a good way to create it is to put a mix of variations around the same colour, which in this case would be the theme of blue, together in one area. And then it heightens that colour and starts to create an iridescent effect. Now another thing that's quite important, especially here, is the tone. You'll see that the tone of this and the light blue from the same brand are very similar, and that's going to give us a bright, jarring, bouncing effect. Again, I've got more information on all of this if you want to go and find out more about colour theory, but for now we won't need to go into too much more detail, and you'll find that this will just give you a really good finish and it will give us some of that bright electric bounce. So you can see that has transformed our butterfly very, very quickly. So just looking at my photo, you don't want to overdo it. That's always the worry. You start adding something that looks really good and then you put it everywhere, and because you put it everywhere there's nothing left to contrast it. So I want to be really quite careful. I keep stopping to look at my photo and see where this iridescence is actually happening. Just catching the bottom edge here, which is very useful. And it's catching the bottom edge on the other side as well. So you can see I'm heading directly over the top of some of that 151, and it will show up very well unless I continually go over it. That will start to lift the dark blue, that 151 underneath, mix them together, and then you get soup. So if you are putting markings over the top of dark areas and you need them to show up, you need to go in basically once, and if you go over it too many more times, instead of getting a sharp line, you'll end up blending things together and the effect will not be as good. Okay, so let's take the black, the 199, and I'm just going to pop in the body. So I'll start off just by picking out roughly where it goes with one line. Obviously we've got the head as well. Now you'll see why I'm not taking too much care and being too accurate over this in just a second. We're going to go back in and adjust our tones. So firstly, I'm going to add a bit of the black over the top of the dark grey, just a little bit, and that is coming directly out of the body of the butterfly so that they are blended together. The body for butterflies is never that pretty, so we don't want to draw too much attention to the body itself. Again, looking at my photo, the tips of the wings are also darker than the dark grey takes us, so I'm just going to put a bit of black on those as well. You can see, again, I'm lifting my pencil. It's helping the black and the dark grey to blend together almost automatically for me. Probably won't need to pick up the dark grey and blend that edge. It's already nice and soft. Obviously that is massively helped by the fact that the black and the dark grey are tonally very similar. Okay, so let's just soften this out down here. I'll make the body a little bit wider, and then I'm going to use two last colours. This is your last opportunity to blend. So I'm taking the 181 first because this is almost like a cousin to the black. It's as dark as we can go without being black. And again, I'm being very, very light, and I'm just fluffing those edges. I'm going around and I'm blending them. And then I'm taking the 151 because this is also very dark and would be like a cousin to that dark grey that we were just using. So again, I'm heading around that edge and I'm blending that out. So you're aiming to get that edge as soft as you can. So the finishing touch would have to be putting antennae on. I'm going to use my dark grey for this. So I just need to sharpen up my pencil. Remember to use the thumb of the hand holding the pencil to steady the blade and guide it through the wood. That way you're much less likely to snap the pastel. Okay, and then making sure that I get a clean area so that there are no sharpenings underneath, because a little bump like that can break the pencil. Just going to sand it down. Make sure, of course, that you wipe it off. Now for doing antennae, this is always a bit that people get a little bit scared of. What I would advise is that you decide where the tips of the antennae are before you start drawing. Then I can just very, very lightly join it back to the head. Let's do the same for the other one. And you can see that I've gone and lent in my butterfly there, which is where the crystal paper really does come in. So let's just get rid of that with our putty rubber. And the last thing to do is to sign. Now I'd always encourage people to pick something other than black to sign with, because black is quite an obvious colour and it can stand out a little bit too much. So I'm just going to take my turquoise. You want to make sure that you're signing over a clean piece of card. If you're not, it can be very difficult to rub out around it. So let's say you popped in your signature and you weren't happy with it. What you'd want to do is take your putty rubber, make sure it's nice and clean, just flatten it out like so, and press it over the top, and you'll lift off a layer. So you can do that as many times as you want. I would warn against actually rubbing your signature out, or trying to, because you're very unlikely to be able to completely get rid of that signature, and then you just end up with a mess. It'd be better to make it fainter and fainter and fainter. So this is very much a beginner's tutorial. If you'd like to find out more, if you'd like to find more classes and start to really progress your skills, then you can find more classes with me linked down below. They range from beginner, intermediate, all the way to advanced. Until next time, happy drawing.